Hello, everyone. I'm here today with another episode of 10x Hacks for Startup and Venture Successes. Today, I have a very good friend, Ashish Seth, on the podcast for you. What's special about Ashish is he's a very seasoned entrepreneur and a corporate professional, as well as he has multiple stints with cross-border startups which work well in India and in Silicon Valley. He's advising many startup ecosystems, and to me, the most striking thing about Ashish's profile is he is enabling digital tools to work from home, to work virtually, remotely, and his company is doing very well. The most of the businesses are hit due to the pandemic, the coronavirus pandemic, and he's doing very well. And I really want to know what are a few hacks which most of us can learn from him. Welcome, Ashish.
Thank you, Vida. I would say, let me firstly thank you for having me on the podcast. And I'll also say kudos to all the good work you're doing. I see a lot of good content that you're posting. Keep it up. And of course, I look forward to your book as well. So, yeah, looking forward to this conversation.
Awesome, awesome. Thank you, Ashish. That's very kind of you. So, just like a quick icebreaker, can you tell a little bit about yourself to the audience, who you are and what you do in the Silicon Valley?
Sure, yeah. Let's a little bit about myself. So, yeah, Ashish Seth. I've been based in Silicon Valley for the past 20 plus years. From a career perspective, I've cut my teeth in enterprise software,
Mhm.
predominantly in the customer experience space. So I've either been building, selling, positioning, you name it, around enterprise software with customer experience being the area that I focus on. And that, if I just a little more detail on that, it's predominantly CRMs, marketing automation, and most recently contact center solutions. So that's my background. Otherwise, I would describe myself as inherently curious and perpetually looking to learn new things and experiences. So that's just that's in a nutshell me. In my current role, I think Vida, you kind of alluded to it. So currently, I'm working with a company called NICE InContact.
Mhm.
It's a leader in cloud contact center solutions,
Uh-huh.
and I run the partner program and strategy there.
Awesome, awesome. So to the audience, a little bit about how I met Ashish. We met at a election campaign, and I really was amazed by the way he was able to lay out the structure of the election campaign and the way he explained the strategy in leading the campaign. And I was so curious. I asked him, and there you go. What he does on a daily basis is guide and strategize businesses. So, Ashish, based on my interaction with you, I wanted to ask, what does your experience as a cross-border entrepreneur across India and Silicon Valley and in corporate, what does it teach you about being resilient? Across the dot-com bubble, across the pandemics and economic meltdowns. Is there anything you can recommend to all the startup founders and corporate professionals who are in a panic right now? Do you have any best practices, anything you can tell them?
Great question. We live in interesting times, and I would call all of us sort of, who work in companies and a lot of these companies are global in nature. So as global citizens, uh, while this pandemic or the situation is unique in its nature, but it is not the first time that we are seeing sort of an unforeseen event come across,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
Um, I don't know if I would call it a best practice, but I would just say, just based on some of the experiences in the past, both as working in a large company or startup for that matter, um, what I can start off by saying is, you know, it's always good to expect the unexpected. That's one. Doesn't really matter which situation you're in. Either you're an entrepreneur or you're working in a large company or even in your personal life for that matter.
Uh-huh.
So that's how I look at it. That's how our company also looks at it for that matter.
Uh-huh.
And I always believe, and just as a general mantra, plan for it. Plan for the unexpected. I always say planning is important. Plans can change. Okay.
And go ahead.
And yeah, I mean that's step one. And then specifically when we come to our professional careers, be it as entrepreneurs or in corporate career, um, you know, I always talk about planning, and this may be a bit of insight or advice. You could call it, I wouldn't call it a best practice, but just my insights, if you will, or my approach to it, if you will.
Uh-huh.
It's about when you plan, you always tend to plan for two situations. One is things you can control
Yeah.
and things you don't control.
Oh,
And when you talk about direct control, say you're an entrepreneur, I think that's some of your audience there. You know,
yeah.
you can control things like your product strategy, your sales and marketing strategy, even budgeting, and to a large extent, even funding, right? There are
Right.
so many sources of funding you can
Uh-huh.
figure out. What you don't control is things like what we are experiencing today or
Uh-huh.
economic downturns, right?
Right. Right.
Now, to plan for that, and I'll just kind of, and I'm sorry, I'm going for a longer answer there.
No, no,
I
please,
think
please.
the way to think about unforeseen circumstances is, I'll give you an example. When you come up, let's take an entrepreneur. I started my company way back. I had my own startup way back in 2007, 2008. And
Uh-huh.
when we started, that was, if you remember, it very first thing that hit us was the last economic downturn.
Yeah.
And call it serendipity, call it hindsight, or call it planning. And I'll probably call it the latter two. Uh, if you're coming up with an idea or a startup, make sure that the idea is of inelastic nature. That is, another way to put it, whatever problem you're solving as an entrepreneur, um, is it a painkiller or is it a vitamin?
Mm.
Try to think about painkillers. That would be fun item,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
Uh, Second insight I could give you is, as an entrepreneur, we often have this tendency, times are great around us, we are in Silicon Valley, money is flush, let's build the next awesome product and customers will come. No,
Mm.
don't do that. Also plan for, uh, as in plan meaning, make sure that while you're building, you
Mm-hmm.
also think through and plan your sales strategy. You think through how you will take it to market,
Uh-huh.
because without that, you're missing a big trick. Not having a sales strategy means you're not having a strategy to get customer feedback.
Mm.
I'll
Right.
pause there. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. No, no. This is a great insight because the rush in which startups are coming out nowadays, I doubt if they even think about marketing and sales strategy when they get together and decide to quit their job or not pursue a degree. Those are seldom the things they think about. And right now you talked about planning for the unexpected. Did you mean black swan situations? Is that what you meant?
Yes, I did. And it sounds sort of paradoxical. How can you plan for something that you don't know? But that is
Exactly.
precisely the point. You've got to, things that you control, you absolutely have a plan, and those plans can change. But there's also the plan for the unexpected, and that's what I'm alluding to. And no matter what the unexpected event is, the three key points to planning for those is making sure that what you're building is a painkiller than a vitamin. So that's just
Right.
the very basis of your idea.
Uh-huh.
Second one is, and I did emphasize a bit on sales, which is sort of,
Yeah. Yeah.
and I'll tell you why. That the interesting aspect when entrepreneurs come up, plan things,
Yeah.
they often the sales cycle comes much later. And I always say, don't do that. Include that in your plan, because that
Mhm.
very plan is your most proactive, reliable, and efficient way to understand where the market is going. So when something hits you, you are actually well aware of your surroundings.
Right. So it's like being agile. It's being very agile. Um, this is beyond lean. You're thinking beyond lean. Most people say include marketing plan in your business plan, but you're talking about sales. Can you give an example to the audience uh, with specific products you've dealt with or anything you can talk about?
Sure, I'm thinking aloud here. I think a good example, yeah, good example would be the very startup that I talked about. So just to go back, right? 2007, 8, 9, I had my own company. Company was Cloud Squad. That was a startup we incubated. And in those days, the idea was helping customers build B2B communities or sort of customer communities. Uh,
Right,
the
right.
idea there, yeah, the idea is you could, for simplicity, call it Facebook for the enterprise. Now, obviously, we are in 2020. That sounds like a very basic idea, but go back in 2007, 8, that was novel. All right.
Mm-hmm.
I think what we got right, again in hindsight, was because we weren't as flush with funding, we really had to be very lean with our budgeting, and that meant that what we built had to be sold, and not sold like 2 years after starting the company, but almost within a quick time horizon. And
Right.
what that taught us is the moment you start having a structured sales cadence, have someone responsible for that, plan for that, since the topic is planning for that, that becomes a very essential tool in two things. One is obviously you get better customer feedback,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
Um, because the best test is if somebody is willing to pay for your solution or service, it's a
Yeah.
painkiller, right?
Yeah.
Right away.
Mm-hmm.
And that helped us plan for these type of situations much better. So
Mm-hmm.
when the downturn hit us,
Mm-hmm.
um, because we knew our customers, we had a customer base, we were able to adapt it very quickly to tailor to the new environment. If we didn't have sales, if we didn't have the customer relationships, you could still be building a product or a solution not knowing where it's going.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, this is a truly good insight. Um, if you look at nowadays they run these campaigns where you pre-order stuff, you pre-book stuff, and then like Kickstarter campaign where you're building and you're sharing with audience, you're getting a feedback right away, and you're modifying your product. Is that something you're alluding to? Does that sound like it?
It does. It does. And I think, those cycles, you bring up a good point. There is always the enterprise software cycle, and then there is sort of the direct to consumer cycle. The feedback loops with direct to consumer cycles are, as you described, these are closed feedback loops. But
Right.
for enterprise large ticket items, which is where obviously my expertise is, it's not like you build up a new, I don't know, enterprise software solution, say for say customer relationship or marketing automation, and the only way you're going to get a feedback is going and actually going through a sales cycle, which could include a proof of concept, actual money transaction, and the sooner you start doing that, the faster is your feedback loop.
Mm. But why would they invest in your plan, unless they saw what you have done as a startup?
Good question again. So the investment, so from a customer's perspective, typically kicks in. Obviously, you need to have something of a minimally viable product, right? That is
Right.
essential.
Mm-hmm.
So that I'm already accounting for. What I'm stating here or suggesting here is, don't wait for the perfect product which is 2 years out. Start thinking about first initial cycles and actually test marketing it and selling it. Test marketing is, yes, you can talk about it, but the actual, what you call validation comes when somebody actually buys it. Even if it's a simple proof of concept, but it's sort of, you get paid for it.
Awesome, awesome. This is a really good, advice to founders, or even people in senior level positions in corporations. This should be like a innate drill. This is how it should be done. I think the business school is very waterfall. This is what you're talking is more agile.
It is. It is. I think it's adaptive business drives agile software, not the other
Yeah.
way around. So yeah.
Yeah, and so that's great advice. And obviously, you're able to do well in the COVID times. So, did you do anything specifically different that you're thriving in the COVID, lockdown time? Your business is doing well. Did you do something different other than the sales cycle in corporate, which you just talked about?
Again, excellent segue there. If we come to my current role, two interesting aspects of it. I work at a company which is providing contact center solutions.
Right.
So by the nature of our business, a lot of our customers tend to be in the state and local governments. They're healthcare service providers. Bottom line, to translate it simply, if unfortunately if today somebody's out of a job, they're probably picking up the phone and calling the state or local unemployment department. Or if you're in a, hopefully not, but if you need medical help, you're probably calling a healthcare service provider. In
Right.
a lot of those cases,
Mm-hmm.
um, it's our software, right? So that's a,
Mm-hmm.
you could call it like inherently, obviously, we're in a good sticky business.
Mm-hmm.
Secondly, obviously, we've been around in this business for a long time, so we have a decent customer base, right, which is where the sales and the engagement comes in.
Mm-hmm.
So we were able to react to it, I guess, in a very timely fashion. So the moment this sort of pandemic started to, you know, uh, I guess, gain momentum, if you will, if I can use that term, started to kind of really become a challenge. We as an organization were able to quickly adapt for three reasons, right? One, of course, and let me, before I go how we adapted, I think the first thing we did was we suddenly recognized that because of the volumes of transactions that will be coming in, we
Mm-hmm.
need to immediately start helping the communities that we work in, which is starting to offer our some of our customers the ability to scale up
Mm-hmm.
without any additional costs. So that's
Mm-hmm.
what we did. We
Mm-hmm.
backed it up with a lot of technology which can actually help you scale.
Mm-hmm.
And you round it off, the fact that we had all these relationships helped us to quickly respond not only to the business environment to the as well as but also the customer environment. So
Awesome. Mm-hmm.
that, I would say, is a sign. One was a function of the business, of course, and that's what we do. But second one, the ability to respond in double quick time was a result of all the planning aspects that I called for. Being ready for a unexpected event, which we were,
Yeah.
ability to react and adapt, which we were,
Mm-hmm.
and then the third one is add a meaningful value in a situation which was an inelastic situation or a painkiller, wherein your solution truly helps people transition to work from home while keeping the lights on.
Awesome, awesome. This is a great service to the community, but also at the same time, you're protecting and preserving your business, and that's the power of planning. And you've moved from a startup to a corporate job, and uh, what are some of the guidelines you can give to people in corporations or even startups about planning? Any specific like, is it, do you do quarterly planning, annual planning, or you have a team which thinks about risk and you take them seriously? What is it that you can tell people about planning?
Oh, great. Good question. So my career has always, I mean, if it's sort of interspersed. I've started with really large companies, then I've gone through a series of startups, including my own, and then back to large organizations. So I think your question, if I understood it correct, was around planning cycles.
Yeah, planning.
Um,
Hmm.
what I can say is large companies, by its very nature, they've been around for a long time. They've seen things, right? It's if some companies, including ourselves, have been around for more than close to 30 years now. So they
Hmm.
have seen a fair share of situations like these, right?
Right. Right.
Planning is obviously part and parcel. So what insights you drive there is, without going into details of what each organization really does, one, what large corporations invariably what they do right, or in most cases try to do right, is planning in the near term and long term. So
Mm.
that DNA is sort of planning DNA is ingrained.
Right.
Some companies do it better than others, but reality is one thing. Large companies almost like running a large country in a way, right? You go through
Yeah.
planning cycles. So that's what that is inherently built in. What I can say for startups, I would always say planning is essential. Plans can change. In startups, you have to keep doing that, but your horizon for planning can, your definition of near term and long term can be slightly different. In startups, it's probably, at least from my perspective, and again, my own experience, it was more like a 6 months to a 1 year plan, and being able to follow through it was a
Right.
great achievement.
Yeah.
For a large company, that is probably a year and beyond.
Right. Because large corporations have higher momentum for
Yes.
change, so they do have some sort of inertia. So I agree with that. So along those lines, I just heard you say it was a very successful stint of planning and management at
Yeah.
NICE. For a person in your position who's listening to this podcast, uh, what can you tell him about the challenges, what to look out for?
So let me make it sort of more broader, if you will, somewhat. So let's rephrase the question, if you allow me. I think if I understood you right, planning in a large organization, or, driving outcomes in a large organizations, what are the challenges? Is that a
Uh,
fair way to put it?
yeah, yeah, let's put it that way. Yeah.
Yeah, fair, fair. Great question again. I've seen both sides of the equation. When you're in a startup, um, the constraints, or sort of, or often the decision making is within a much smaller group, so there's agility built in. But
Right.
when you switch to large corporations, you need to be aware of couple of things, right?
Mhm, mhm.
Large organizations have scale,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
But lack speed. All right, so
Mhm.
always be aware of that.
Uh-huh.
No matter how awesome the company is when compared to a 10, 15, 20% startup, your own startup, my startup, or even a startup which has, scaled to series B or
Right.
C.
Mm-hmm.
Large organizations have scale, but they will lack in speed.
Mm-hmm.
If you're planning, plan to tap into the scale aspect of things.
Mm. That'll
Okay,
be that'll be a strength.
that's a strength. So you go after the strength. The second one is, anything that you want to get done in a larger organization, decision making often will start with coalition building. So whenever you're planning or trying to drive outcomes to your initiatives in a large company, tap
Yeah.
into the scale,
Uh-huh.
build coalitions.
Uh-huh.
And the last one, also be cognizant, and don't be frustrated also at the same time,
Yeah.
that large companies come up with a lot of competing priorities as well. So
Yeah.
your priority may not always be number one every time. So if you're aware of those three lessons, you
Yeah.
know, tap scale, build coalitions, and be aware of what is happening in the broader spectrum will
Yeah.
help you drive your planning and outcomes better. Startups, flip side, it's almost the opposite. If you're an entrepreneur, or you're a co-founder, or in the executive leadership team,
Right.
pretty much your decision making can happen in a short meeting over a, you know conference room, and you can
Right.
start driving things.
Right.
Large organizations, a little more complex.
Yeah. This is amazing. Coincidentally, I'm working with a team which is creating policy for AI governance, and we are dealing with a country level decision making body there. They talk about subcommittees, and they have a multi-stakeholder model very similar to yours. So it's amazing how these uh, ruling a large organization makes you ready for running an election campaign, isn't it?
It
That's
does. It
Yes,
is.
that's what impressed me most when I worked with you on the election campaign. All your skills are transferable.
I must say that if I go back to that about a year ago, for your benefit of your audience, I don't know if we can give context there.
So,
This was about a friend of ours. He's running for the Congress,
right.
uh, and this was the primary elections. And you're very right, Vidya. It's the complications of running an election.
Yes.
It's even more different than a corporate thing, right? Because unlike a corporate which has got a mission, vision statement, and a sort of a charter to drive shareholder value, which is its single most guiding principle,
Uh-huh.
in a campaign in a public life,
Yeah.
imagine the other constraints coming in. So you or it's not only the every other thing that we talked about in terms of planning, but you have to also plan for far too many competing priorities and interests coming together, and your ability to cut through that. So
Yeah.
That experience that you and I went through was very interesting. I would just say that was a good learning experience.
Exactly. And coming to my next question, I've been listening to this term a lot nowadays, the an anti-fragile organizations. And I was reading this article from Harvard Business Review, which says organizations should no longer be built for efficiency, but they should be built for resilience. And the author makes a whole case about it. uh, so anti-fragile means things which you depend on. If they go away, will you still be able to survive?
Hmm.
So what is your one most important tip, other than planning and other than thinking about sales strategy in your initial plan? Anything else you think will help you through anti-fragility, like repurposing or pivoting? Is there anything like that you want to tell your audience?
Oh, good one. You know, that is inherently a characteristic. So one thing what I could add to that is, one characteristics which develops anti-fragile, what do you call, characteristics of an organization is, and I'll go back to just another lesson which I've seen in my career.
Mm-hmm.
Um, One more thing that organizations should do to become anti-fragile is, one is of course the adaptability and the ability to pivot, right?
Right, right.
But the third aspect is, I, the world that we live in, the business models change so fast, right?
Uh-huh,
Competitions change so fast.
uh-huh.
Now, a lot of companies tend to kind of, what I call the, the, while we get so busy running our existing lines of businesses,
Right,
right,
right.
that we fail to tap into the next emerging wave. And you can just sort of look at every industry out there. It could be, automobile moving from, I don't know, gasoline based to electric. And if people are not reacting, some will win, some will lose. And if
Right.
you look at hindsight, the ones who will lose are who failed to invest and adapt or plan, all three, if you will, to
Mhm.
figure out what is the next future. If you end up spending all your time designing the best done gasoline engine and the most luxurious car without spending a commensurate amount of your effort trying to figure out what would your car be in the electrical world or the
Right,
self-driven world, you're going
right.
to lose out.
Yeah.
And that is again anti-fragility. If I move it to software area, which is where we all are comfortable,
Uh-huh.
I would have a portfolio of capabilities that I take to market today. But
Yeah.
what am I doing to
Mhm.
develop capabilities which have to react to, say, a changed environment and the future? So that's a pattern I think I might just, from my perspective,
Mhm.
that is another trait of building anti-fragile patterns or characteristics of an organization, which is, what I call, uh, there's a book, I'm forgetting the name, but it's, if you
Yeah.
look at businesses, that's a future state business that you need to think about.
Right, right. That's a great insight. Thank you for that, Ashish. As we wrap up our conversation here, you've been through lots of ups and downs, and you've managed a variety of portfolio of products here in your journey. What is your advice on driving value in a changing business environment, other than the factors you mentioned here, staying anti-fragile? Is there anything you want to talk about? You can address startups and mid and large sized corporations as the three different audience here.
I think maybe there's going to be, no, good question. I think it's my, if I were to just sort of give a closing thought process, let's break it down by startups and say large organizations, because that's the two broad categories.
Sure.
Uh, Startups, I would firstly by saying, irrespective of where we are in our current environment, if there was no better time in the history, especially in technology, than today to be an entrepreneur. So let's start there. So,
Yeah.
where we are today, you
Uh-huh.
know, um, that's one. There's no better time.
Uh-huh.
Second one, I will say a bit philosophical. Often situations like these lead to breakdowns in, you know, funding cycles, business cycles, call it what you will. The pandemic does lead to sort of breakdowns in what we consider normal. But
Uh-huh.
breakdowns also lead to breakthroughs. Okay.
Yeah.
As long as you are focusing on the right areas, the right value, which I was referring to as building
Yes.
painkillers for today and tomorrow,
Yes.
and matching it to sort of uh, market demands in the
Right.
in the near term horizon, and making sure that you close that loop,
Mm-hmm.
you're likely to have a better chance of success, right?
Awesome. Yeah.
Uh, and I know I keep going back to the sales argument, and my sorry if I sound very repetitive there, but that is one of the biggest insights I developed,
Mm-hmm.
because when I started from an engineering world, then
Mm-hmm.
moved over to sort of the business side, I
Mm-hmm.
always felt that one side, uh, sort of underreached on the other side, meaning one did not look at the other side, and the other side does not quite know what happens on the engineering side. Only
Right.
when you close that loop and
Mhm.
build the right painkiller, you have the odds of success there.
Awesome. So great advice, Ashish. Thank you so much for your time. You've given a very holistic view to startup founders as well as people holding the fort in large corporations. Definitely, your advice will be a beacon of light. I really appreciate the time and insights you provided today, and I'd like to thank you and wish you all the very best.
Thank you so much, and good luck to your audience as well. And of course, you and I will stay in touch, and I look forward to more and more of your publications, posts, and of course, your book coming up. So, thank you.